I want to welcome everybody to today's Medical Alley webinar titled The Future is Tiny, How Micron Scale 3D Printing is Changing Medical Device Manufacturing. My name is Ben Wagner. I'm delighted to be your host here for today's webinar. A big thank you to our sponsors who are with us here today, Parvus 3D and BMF, Boston Microfabrication. You see here we have leaders from both organizations who are going to really dive into this world of 3D printing and its impact on medical device manufacturing. With us today is Sheila Ziobro. She's a biomedical engineer turned 3D microprint strategist and the general manager of Parvus 3D. And also on this panel today is Jake Collins, a senior application engineer at Boston Microfabrication, or BMF. Two engineers that we're thrilled to have with us this morning, who are both at the forefront of micron scale 3D printing innovation. And we're thrilled to have them share our knowledge. So Sheila, Jake, welcome. We really appreciate your time here this morning. Sheila, I'll start with you. I'm curious to get a little bit more knowledge about your why. How did you get started in this work? And what keeps you motivated to do the work you're doing every day?
Absolutely. And thank you for the introduction, Ben. We're excited to be here and join you on this webinar today. I'm actually on site at Parvus, so you can kind of see a lot of our printers behind me, and will be great for everyone to see them, in real time. So a little bit of background. I have a postgraduate degree in biomedical engineering, and I've spent most of my career working in the medical device field. So I've done a little bit of everything from R&D to manufacturing and quality. And I'm currently the general manager at Parvus 3D, where we, focus on micro-level 3D printing and design. And what I noticed as I was in these various roles for medical device companies is the largest or maybe greatest risk of getting our product to market was the bottleneck of the design iteration process. And so when I learned about the capabilities of micro 3D printing, this really overcomes that challenge. And so I was excited to join Parvus and become part of the solution and help others, collaborate with others who have the same issue.
Well, Sheila, thank you for that. Very cool that you're actually at Parvus too. For everybody watching that is not a digital background, that is actually Parvus, and that is an actual 3D printer too. And I understand you'll have some examples to show us, just like the scale.
Absolutely, I have samples.
Yeah,
yes, we're looking forward to it.
Very cool. Well, Jake, same question to you. You're also an engineer. Would love to hear a little bit more about the motivation behind the work that you do. And your why. What keeps you motivated to do this work every day?
Yeah, so a little bit on my background here. My undergrad and postgrad degrees were in materials engineering with a focus on like nano and microscale biomaterials. And then I also worked in some traditional manufacturing before coming over to BMF, which I've been here for about the last 3 years now. And, always been very interested in additive, how to use this technology. It's right on that cutting edge of everything, and, seemed to be kind of a perfect fit coming from that nano and micro scale background in materials. And the big why here is just BMF's working on those really highly technical challenges. It's always interesting solving new problems. There's really never a dull day. It's always things that people can't do in a traditional manufacturing way, or they're struggling to do in one of those other methods. So we're always using our technology to really push the limits of what engineers can do.
Well, thank you, Jake. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion. I think it's a really unique topic and really one that's on the forefront of innovation. And so thank you both again for being here. I'll turn it back over to Jake and to Sheila to kind of continue to explain a little bit more about today's discussion.
Perfect. So we can kind of hop right into this. And before we hop into this, I do want to say, just Parvus and BMF have been working together for the last couple of years. BMF provides the printers. Parvus is a print service bureau. We've worked pretty closely together. And that's why we thought this was the perfect opportunity to showcase micro additive from both sides of that equation. Before we kind of hop into the micro additive side, I do want to give just kind of a high level printing history, just to kind of showcase where it all started from and how we got to the micro additive and precision space. For those of you who don't know some of this stuff, this will be good high level background here. So kind of the first type of 3D printing, it was actually in the early 1980s, SLA style printing. It's photopolymerization. Liquid polymer resin is cured using UV light. So that is typically done a laser that rasters across the surface of the resin and cures the part layer by layer. And we're just touching on this now, but we'll come back to this more later because this is kind of the technology that leads to our pulse technology, and this is kind of the background for that. So the next technology is SLS, it's selective laser sintering. And what this does is it's like a polymer powder or a metal powder if you're using SLM. But what it does is it fuses the powder bed together with a laser that sinters across the surface layer by layer. Typically, it's thermoplastic polymers. This will also be used in metal with SLM, which it's a laser across metal powders instead. So instead of a liquid resin, this is still very similar to SLA. It's still using a laser to cure these selective layers. But instead of using a resin, it's using powder-based materials. The third one, everyone's probably familiar with this because this is typically what they think of when you hear 3D printing or additive manufacturing. It's FDM. This is a material extrusion system that typically uses spools of plastic materials. That's what you typically see with like the hobbyist level printers. And it will lay down melted material through a hot end extrusion nozzle. And that's what you're just getting that path to create those layers. And the last one, just to hit on this really quick, is material jetting. It's one of the last kind of major types of 3D printing. It actually uses a print head to dispense droplets of photosensitive material. So again, this is another UV curable type of printing process. And it's interesting because the print heads are kind of created from the same technology that you would get from a standard inkjet printer, just using it as a layer by layer 3D printing method as opposed to just a 2D method instead. And so we've discussed the four major categories here. But these typically, when you think of 3D printing, you're looking at macro scale parts. And with pulse technology, we're looking more at that micron level accuracy and feature size. So we'll go into a little bit more on the actual sizes we're talking about first.
So I'd like to jump in here because as engineers and scientists, we all know what a micron is. And we're aware that, 1,000 microns are in 1 millimeter. But, what does that actually mean? So I really like this graphic here because it highlights the scale that we're actually talking about. When we talk about being able to microprint to true CAD fidelity, what are we talking about? Here is roughly like a grain of sand at the beach, or a human hair, 70 microns in diameter. A white blood cell, 25 microns. A red blood cell, 8 microns. And so in a minute here, when Jake starts talking about the printers and the tolerances that can be kept, and he says, oh yeah, plus or minus 25, we're talking a single white blood cell tolerance. And so to me, that's just fascinating. And this is a great way for all of us to kind of get on the same page and understand the true precision and accuracy we're going to be capable of doing.
On this next slide, I wanted to show an overview video of the pulse technology. So what this is showing you here, just very quickly, is one of our actual systems. It's one of the S240s that Sheila actually has behind her as well. And what this does is it's a projection-based system. So you can see here, it's actually projecting section by section, layer by layer, stitching together these images, and vat polymerization as well. So that's where you're getting that cured part in that vat, and you can see them actually coming out of this vat of resin at this stage. But just wanted to show a short video before actually diving into all the details on why this works the way it works and how we're able to achieve that very high resolution and accuracy. This is kind of the diagram. This is exactly what you saw in the printer, but just kind of a diagram a little bit more on the technical side of what we were looking at. So this is a DLP SLA hybrid kind of system. So in comparison to SLA, SLA, as we talked about, this uses a scanning laser to trace across the surface of the resin. And in DLP printing, it's a projector lens instead. So what we're getting here is we're using a projector that flashes those projections instead of rastering that small laser spot across the surface. And it typically allows for faster printing, higher resolution in these fine features because you're controlling pixel size a little bit tighter. But in comparison to traditional DLP, it's typically one large projection across your whole build. And then you'll typically see resolution that's the best in the center of that build, just because of the way the projector comes down. And this is typically an issue when you're looking at really high accuracy parts, because as you move towards the edges of your build area, you get a little bit of something that we call like pixel pitch. Is it's coming down at an angle is the way that that pixel is projecting. So if you say you have a 10 micron pixel, which is typically what we're talking about here with our S240 system, in traditional DLP, you might have that perfect 10 micron pixel right in the center. But as you get to the edges, the pixels will start to, maybe be a little bit more rectangular, like a 9.2 micron by 10.2 or something like that. So it doesn't really seem like it's much when you're thinking about it that way. It's, fractions of a micron. But over the course of a whole build, and when we're talking extremely high accuracies and keeping these really tight tolerances, really hampers any high precision. So the way that we overcome this, you actually saw in the video, was we stitched together multiple zones of the build area. So the projection keeps that high resolution and perfect pixel pitch, but then in combination with a whole bunch of different stage movements, software processing, allows the zones to be stitched together into larger individual parts or high number of smaller parts to be printed at once. So with our S240, it's 100 by 100 millimeter build area. So this allows you to keep that high resolution across the entire build platform, whether it's one single large part or hundreds of smaller parts that you're looking at. And you're not going to lose resolution in any spot on that build platform. So essentially, Pulse technology combines the best of both those two different methods to achieve those high resolution parts. And another thing to hit on here too is another reason why we're able to achieve this high resolution is actually that we are open platform system and have customizable parameters. So it allows you to get extremely detailed on energy dosage going into the builds layer by layer to achieve that higher resolution and feature accuracy. Typically on most other systems, you're using general settings, or there are material specific settings that will get you good parts. But when you're talking about, like Sheila's saying, plus or minus 25 microns, we're talking about one white blood cell here. You want to make sure you have full control over all of those things. So our open platform system allows you to do that. And actually with that open platform system, it gives you the ability to use a wide range of materials, both BMF specific materials, as well as custom or third-party materials. And we can actually talk about a few of those on the next slide here. With this, this is just kind of a general, some of our BMF validated materials, kind of our specific, some of our specific lineup of materials. We don't need to go too deep on any material properties here or anything like that. But the nice thing to note here is it is 405 nanometer curable UV resin. So it is pretty much a standard for DLP style printers to use 405 nanometer wavelength. So it allows you to work with potentially way more materials than you would at some other material range for UV light curing. Typically, the biggest difference here with a lot of our materials is that they are tuned for thinner layer heights and higher resolution, so they have more light blocker in them. We typically operate on our 10 micron system anywhere between 10 and 40 micron layer heights. Most typical DLP printers that you're using that are more hobbyist level or just larger macro scale parts is 50 micron and above for layer heights. So this allows us to get to a way smaller feature size in the Z and control that Z resolution a lot tighter. And part of that is due to the materials. Even on this too, just an interesting thing to note here on a specific material, this BMF Med at the end of this list would be much more interesting because this is a medical device webinar. This is actually also a third-party material. It's 3D Systems Amber Med resin that's been validated on our machines, which is biocompatible, can be sterilized, and also just kind of shows that other third-party materials do work on our system and can be customized for that. So it allows a little bit more freedom of design and freedom to choose specific material properties that you're looking for there.
That's a popular one that we've had a lot of, and especially for medical device companies, a lot of people have enjoyed using the Med product. So I was going to shift focus real quick. Now that Jake's explained some of the technology and the materials available, I just wanted to pause and discuss, when do we use additive manufacturing over conventional manufacturing, and specifically micro precision manufacturing. So if you look at this graphic here, you have the cost versus complexity in relation to 3D printing and your standard, subtractive technologies or molding. So if you have a simple, let's say, dowel, you can do traditional methods. There's really no need for this level of precision or accuracy, and you're certainly not looking to iterate. As you become more complex in your parts, so let's say you've got a unique geometry or very intricate details, things that are pushing the boundaries of what traditional manufacturing can do, or there's a bunch of process steps and you don't want to have, 5 different processes, you'd rather have a single unit. This is really the area that additive manufacturing shines, because you are essentially getting the complexity of it for free. So if you were to get something machined at a micro level, the cost is going to be huge, or even having micro injection molding done. So there's a higher cost, a longer lead time. And for additive manufacturing, it doesn't matter. You can get it just as quickly and there's no additional cost. So that kind of leads us into, all right, you've got a complex part like this part we have, this endoscope cap we have here. What are some of the advantages of micro 3D printing? So one big one is part consolidation. And we touched on that briefly on the previous slide, where if you have several units that you need to assemble as a single piece, you're going to have a lot more assembly steps. There's going to be additional inspections, more SKU numbers, and then you're also opening yourself up to issues like stack-up tolerances. By designing something as a single unit and really building from the inside out with additive technology, we eliminate all of that. So one example that I can think of recently is we were partnering with a group from a medical device company where they were having slot alignment issues, and the positioning of these was extremely important. They had very small millimeter size units, and they consistently had this problem. So really, we worked with them to optimize how to make some minor adjustments and print it as a single unit. And now the process can be done much faster. The positioning has perfect accuracy and it's a single unit. So you've eliminated a bunch of other assembly steps and, other suppliers.
And even on that too,
Sure.
when we talk about that complexity for free, it's a great graph and shows, the part consolidation there, but that doesn't even show the other side of it, as far as there may not be another manufacturing method.
Absolutely.
When you start combining these parts, you can't make it in a traditional way. So there is a whole nother side to that too, this opens up that freedom for.
Yep. And look at that. The last thing on this slide is design freedom. So some other benefits we have with 3D printing is, the rapid prototyping, and where something would take months to get the parts, you can now have it in hours, and you'll have numerous iterations simultaneously. It may take, several months to get a micro injection mold made, and they're very costly. And that's it. Once you have that, you're done. And so as we're rushing and trying to iterate to get that best design before the design freeze phase, this is really where micro 3D printing and precision 3D printing shines, because you're going to be able to test numerous different iterations and they will be approaching true CAD fidelity. So you can rely on the data you get from that. And then if you do want to go on and do a mold, you can, or you can continue printing for production pieces. Another thing, and Jake pointed this out, is the design freedom. It's a completely different way of thinking. And for us engineers, it's not, oh, well, how am I going to remove parts of this? How am I going to drill a hole through this, piece? And there's things where, actually, let's hop to our next slide, like a uniform lattice. This cannot be done with subtractive technology. You cannot injection mold this. The only way to create a uniform lattice structure is through 3D printing. And this particular one is a spiral lattice with a through hole. And I'm going to take actually advantage of being here on site at Parvus. So to better visualize this lattice structure, this was printed on a regular tabletop 3D printer, and it's about 30 times larger than the image you just saw. So as you can see, the intricacy here, there is no way we could, and there's a through hole, and the diameter varies throughout the through hole. So there's no way you can make this other than using 3D printing. Now, what's really cool is I'm going to show you a full plate that we had printed in a matter of hours, and it is kind of tricky to show off the details here, but much to that point of rapid prototyping, you can fit hundreds on a plate. Right now we space them out for educational purposes, but we could probably fit a good 500 pieces on here. So let's say you had, 50 iterations you want to try. Great, you can have 10 of each of those, test your sample, and then have it ready within hours. All right, now you want to retest. Okay, great, a few more hours. And so you can run through as many design iterations as you want, getting your parts to market faster. So let me see if I can actually pull one of these off. Okay, just to show you the scale, and I'm sorry if you're probably just seeing my fingernail here, but let me do this. This is 5 millimeters in the Z height, and there is a through hole of 650 micron. And I have one that's, let's see, this one's maybe a little bit larger, maybe a little easier to see. So this is 5 times larger. So this one has a through hole of 650 micron, and that through hole diameter varies. But I think the coolest part is each individual lattice structure here has a crossbar of 60 microns. That is slightly less than a human hair. And to me, that's just fascinating to have that level of precision and have that ability that cannot be done using any other conventional technology. Let me see if I can. So I'm going to actually try to show you. We have our 230. This is our 2 micron printer right here. And we went ahead and printed the lattice structures on a substrate, but good luck seeing these. So it looks like a square, but there's actually a couple thousand of these small hollow structures printed on this, which is amazing to me. They are very difficult to handle, and I'm not even going to try to pull one off because, I'd probably lose it. In fact, that's probably the biggest challenge we have working with the 2 micron is if you breathe too hard, which is why you see I'm putting it over here, or if you sneeze, forget it. Your parts are going everywhere. I don't know if you guys have that issue, Jay.
Yeah, I would typically recommend printing extra parts just in case, just for handling purposes.
Absolutely,
that's the hardest part.
Absolutely. But I guess I'm just showing this because if you see, like, is this smaller than the palm of my hand? And thousands of pieces are fitting with that level of detail. All right. So
And
let me
even on that one too, just another note is those spirals, the struts on those are going to be even smaller. I believe they're probably about 10 microns on that one. So now we're talking.
That one was 15. That was 15 microns on that, the crossbar lattice.
Yeah, so on the original, we're talking thinner than a human hair, and now on the 2 micron ones, we're talking even thinner than that, and more accurate as well. Yeah.
Well, and this is why we printed. So here are the little crossbars, and so the size of like slightly smaller than a human hair. So, and with that plus or minus 25 micron precision. All right. I'm going to get back in the slide so I don't lose any more of those parts. Here we go. All right. So here is a zoomed in photo of this tray of spiral lattices that were printed on our 10 micron and some of the measurement details. And this is just from our Magic software. So you can kind of get an overview of everything we did there. Another opportunity when it comes to design for additive is topology optimization. And this is really interesting because, well, let's start with this image here. Our team created this specifically for educational purposes to kind of showcase the different designs that can be achieved. So this was modeled in a 3D CAD system, and here's the image from the computer. We went ahead and printed it, and if you look at the second image where the red arrow is pointing, this is actually a zoomed in version. And I think I got excited and ahead of myself here. There's a different design in each of these quadrants. So you've got some micro needle arrays with variable diameters and shapes. And then this last one is a free-form surface. It's my favorite, and I like to call it the mountain range. And when we zoom in, you can see why. So this is under a microscope, and this was printed on our 10 micron printer. Now, I can't imagine this would be something you could easily do using subtractive technology. And it's yet another example of how we are approaching that true CAD fidelity. And you know what? I actually have some of these parts as well.
Yeah, and so like you pointed out too, just looking at those, that mountain range specifically, it has undercuts and features like that would be extremely difficult, if not impossible, in most subtractive methods. So just highlighting that design freedom again, that you can create more to your application versus creating for manufacturability.
Exactly. So you'll see we've got about 16 of these pieces, and these are 20 by 20, and they were printed on our 10 micron printer. Here are each of the four corners. So one of the things I'd like to point out is these little micro needle arrays that I'm briefly touching, and I don't know how well you can see these. They have hundreds of microneedles in these small sections. And, to Jake's point, this is, truly the possibilities are kind of endless with this. I don't know. Do you have anything else to add, Jake?
No, I think you hit everything on that. Definitely the design freedom and, kind of ability to not have to limit yourself to manufacturability when you're designing parts is a huge win.
Yeah. It's kind of difficult to show the detail over Zoom, but I do think it's nice that you see this image, and so we're saying true CAD fidelity, and you see, well, here's how small it is when I'm holding it up, and then here's the precision level we can achieve. So I find it, truly remarkable. Finally, another area where precision additive manufacturing really shines is in the microfluidics and lab on a chip space. And here are a couple very evocative images of microfluidics. So this blood vessel here on a dime, there is only one way of making this, and that is using additive manufacturing. You cannot, mill this or injection mold this. There's really nothing else you can do to achieve this. What's really cool is this was printed on the 2 micron printer, the same one behind me. And if you look at these capillary channels here, they get down to 18 micron across. So to kind of better visualize 18 microns, that's 2 red blood cells side by side. That's the width we're talking about. Which again, so this creative freedom when you're designing with 3D, this is what we're talking about, approaching this true CAD fidelity, the precision we have. We're able to achieve things that perhaps we may have just spoken about previously, and now they can be done and done quickly. I'm not going to get into too much more detail because I want to hand it over to Jake. He actually has a couple great case studies specifically about microfluidics and lab on a chip.
Yeah, this first one goes right in with the microfluidics and the ability to design around your application and your solution and not be limited by traditional methods. So this one is actually Incomet's a biotech startup, and it's focused on skin cancer treatment. So this technology that they've come up with is based on microfluidics and microneedles. And what this does is it allows the microenvironment of the tumor and all of its components to be physically removed. So it's like a liquid biopsy treatment. And the way that it does this is if you're looking at this component, this cap here, those two needles, the stainless steel needles that are placed into the 3D printed part after it's printed, but they are placed very close to each other and they work together. One needle actually injects a carrier fluid and the other one aspirates it. So the fluid travels between those two needles within the skin, mixes with the cell fluid, drains all those signals present in the area, and it's done continuously without having to remove those needles. So it's able to kind of remove that microenvironment of the tumor and treat skin cancer at the source without having, highly invasive procedures to start with. And, that's just kind of the application here, but looking at the parts themselves, they're uniquely qualified to be printed by our technology because, as Sheila was mentioning, they can't really be made any other way. Things of this nature, they're internal microfluidic channels that are three-dimensional as well. So there's really no other current method that's easy to make these parts. And these actually, it's 200 micron diameter channels that are printed between 20 and 40 microns away from each other in that cap system. So the distance between them and the size of those channels is what's critical for these to work properly. So achieving that really high precision and accuracy is critical for this application. And another neat thing to note is it also is biocompatible. So these are end-use components that can be used with patients. You don't have to create these and then fabricate them in some other method. These are end-use components as is.
That's a really good point, Jake. A lot of times we think of 3D printing or micro 3D printing as purely prototyping. And while that is a great use for additive manufacturing, these can actually be mass produced using this technique.
This next one that I want to talk about still falls into that microfluidic category as well. And this one is actually like a multiplex sensing device for COVID-19. Everyone knows lab on a chip style devices. This mold was actually used to try to develop an alternative method to detect the infection at earlier stages using like viral NRA analysis. And typically, as most people know, with PDMS molds, master molds, that kind of stuff, you're using photolithography to create these, and that requires complex steps, multiple exposures, typically pretty limited in your design capabilities, more two-dimensional rather than 3D. And when you're looking at getting increased design complexity, you're pretty much limited by that method of fabrication then. So the original design of this too is a little bit of background. They only had 500 micron channels on this using those traditional methods because they were just limited by what they could achieve there. But then once they started iterating with our Pulse 3D printers, that design actually changed. They were able to increase it to 850 micron channels. So they were scaling up the complexity of the part without changing the footprint of it at all. And much faster time scale too. As Sheila mentioned before, you're not waiting to use these traditional methods, having weeks of production time to then come back and iterate on another design. You're able to actually just, print these in hours or overnight, test your design, and then come back to it right after. So didn't have to worry about that complex and multi-stage process that actually takes a way longer time. So one of the neat things about this is currently it's 8 channels right now, but they do believe that they can get even higher amounts as they keep designing here too, which, just kind of further solidifies that faster design iteration and allows for increased complexity at that high precision as well. This last case study that I want to mention too, this is actually a distal tip. So it is a single-use scope. This is R&DR Medical. This is used in diagnosis and treatment of disorders of the urinary tract. So it's a endoscope, and the component that we're talking about, as you can see, it's on that end of the endoscope. It's just that distal tip. But what this does is this distal tip here, it has to house a camera, the illumination, and has to have a working channel that goes through there for the passage of the therapeutic tools through that scope itself. So all of those have to be contained within there. And we're talking, this whole part is 130.13 inches in diameter. And wall thickness is down to about that 100 micron range. So when you're talking about thin walls like that and very small devices that have to have very high precision, making these parts in a micro injection mold fashion, you're talking maybe months of lead time and very expensive prototype molds just to test your designs out here. So with a part like this, it's great because this can be fabricated very quickly, and you have many design cycles you can go through on one build, just to test out all that functionality of the design without having to wait for the next step in testing. So it allows you a much faster timeline, which saves you a lot of money, as well as less expensive tooling costs, which is another added benefit there than waiting on those injection mold tool tests. And then with a product like this, you could go to injection molding for your final design once you hit your design freeze, if you're making high amounts of parts per year. But the interesting thing for this one too, and Sheila kind of mentioned this with the spiral lattices, is you can actually build quite a few of these on a build plate. So we could get about 500 of these on a build, and using medical grade materials. So these can be considered for end use parts and actually still keep up with, smaller production quantities that they would need, and allows for that faster iteration to development cycle as well.
Jake and I want to kind of wrap up our presentation with this slide that I pulled directly from the Parvus website. And the team here developed it to kind of give you a blueprint or, tips and tricks when it comes to designing for micro 3D printing. And so obviously I won't go through all of these, but there's, numerous parameters. There's more online, minimum wall thickness or the maximum aspect ratio for some of the channels we were discussing. And it's tailored to both the 2 micron printer, the 10 micron printer, and then online we have it tailored to each type of available resin, because you'll get minor differences between these. And so this is a great starting point when you're designing and you're like, well, can I have, how large an unabridged overhang can I have? I don't know, Jake, would you like to add?
Yeah, so another thing to note on this too, this is all really great. And just so everyone understands, when we're talking about like resolutions and feature sizes, you can see that in that first graphic, the XY resolution, the 2 and 10 microns, that's referring to the actual pixel size that we're controlling down to. So on our S230, it's a 2 micron pixel. And on the 10 micron system, it's a 10 micron pixel. And then typically where a lot of these design guidelines are coming from is you typically want about 5 pixels to make a feature. And that's more just to create good structures with vertical holes. If you have 2 pixels across, you're going to get a little bit of a pixelated design, purely because of the limitations of the projector there. And that's why we have different resolution systems that go even further down. So if you're looking for things that are hundreds of microns in feature sizes and keeping those high tolerances, you're looking at the 10 micron system. But if you need something with even finer resolution and even tighter tolerances, then you're looking at the 2 micron system as well. So there's kind of a wide range of freedom you have on all of those sizes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And another point to make is you were talking about the optical resolution or XY. And so that's different. I know a lot of times when we're talking to people, they get confused by that. So the layer thickness is the Z height, and that's going to be different than the optical resolution. So for that one, for the 2 micron, you can have 5 or 10, even 20 micron layer heights in the Z direction. And for the 10 micron, you can have 10, 20, up to 40 micron layer heights there. And, Jake and I, we get excited. We could go through all of this, but we don't, we're not looking to put anyone to sleep during lunchtime here. So there's a lot of information on both the BMF website and our website. I would encourage you to take a look, and we're always more than happy to assist. So you can reach out to myself or Jake, you can reach out to BMF or Parvus, and we'd love to help answer any of these questions you may have.
Well, excellent. Sheila, Jake, I'm not an engineer, and I know we have a lot of engineers on this call, but I am just astounded by the scale and the possibilities here. So we really appreciate your examples and in how in depth you've gone into this topic. We do have a few questions that have come in, and I encourage anybody who's with us to put your questions in the Q&A function as well. We've got a bit of time here to answer some of those questions. First one, I think while we were on that slide a moment ago, Sheila,
yes, let me
there was a question, what is the resolution of horizontal holes?
Okay.
Yeah, so I could probably hop in on that a little bit there too.
Jake. Yeah.
So typically horizontal holes, if you're looking at our 10 micron system, we typically try to keep those more towards that 100 micron feature size. But again, that is a little bit dependent on the material you're using. If you're using a material that has a lower depth of cure, you can get finer layers. And if you're using maybe a third-party material or something that's got a higher depth of cure, you're going to be a little bit more limited in that, but it is a little bit more material dependent. The system can handle those thinner layers.
Well, yeah, and each of the materials has a different viscosity. So, and we should mention, I know Jake had talked about the OpenVat system. We can also do custom materials. So, if there's something that doesn't suit the needs you have, there's other opportunities. And then that's going to impact these parameters here.
Another question came in on a previous case study that Jake was referencing from UC Berkeley. Yes. The question is, what material was printed for the mold and what material is molded? Is there any mold release used?
Yes. So on that one, the material that was printed for the mold, it was just in it's called HTL yellow is the material that this was printed in. It's kind of our standard resin, good general purpose resin. And they were using PDMS to do molding off of it. And they did use a mold release on there just to help preserve those fine features and channels. But we have seen people that can get away with no mold release, depending on your feature sizes. But typically people are using a mold release formulation and then able to PDMS mold right off of that for multiple cycles too. It's not a single use master mold design.
Excellent.
And there's also higher temperature ability resin. So there's a HT200, so it can go up to 200C. We actually had one where there was going to be other processes and they needed a certain temperature. So all the information's available, but we can help you select.
Another question comes in here too, kind of on the regulatory side of things. And question really is if you could provide insights into which, I think if I'm reading this question right, medical sort of regulatory agencies, these parts have to, or regulations rather, these parts have to fulfill, and what typical challenges maybe have you faced in validating to meet those regulations? So
I can start it off here. Most of those materials, the medical grade materials, have gone through ISO testing, like ISO 9000. They've had a handful of those tests already completed on them. And typically what we see is we can validate them all we want, but once they are printed and getting ready for end use, we typically see that the customer will also validate them themselves with all of those testing regulations to make sure that it meets all of those standards. And again, kind of like Sheila was saying too, is there are custom materials as well that you can try, or other processes. You could use these for mold inserts and mold your part in the material that you're looking for as well. So there's kind of a wide range of opportunity to make the parts with a wide range of materials as well so that they suit your needs.
And also from a regulatory perspective, none of these are implantable, the ones that we're talking about. So that is going to require less regulation. Yeah. A lot of times they may be, they're biocompatible, you can sterilize them, but they might be a component that goes into a device or something that maybe comes in contact with the surface of the skin or with blood. And so since it has been validated, again, like 9001 and 13485, all those standards, it's different than what you would traditionally have for medical devices.
Good point of clarification there. Another question, have either BMF or Parvus ever developed a bloodstream delivery system? For example, something that can move through bloodstreams and then ultimately reach a destination to deliver a medical treatment?
Well, that just sounds exciting. We haven't yet. I mean, I don't see why it couldn't be done.
Mhm.
I don't know, Jake, have you guys done that?
Yeah, I'm kind of on the same page there. We haven't done anything like that currently, but again, like you said, that's something that could be done testing wise. We
Absolutely.
don't have implantable materials currently, but that's something that eventually, and allowing for open material system, it's definitely a possibility.
Another question coming in here too on sterilization. And the question is, do you have any data on sterilization for the various BMF materials? Is ETO the only option, or can they withstand autoclaving?
Yeah, so there's actually a handful of materials, the HTL, the MED, and one of the other materials called RG. They can all withstand autoclaving, and that's typically the sterilization method that most people are using with those materials. But it does work with a variety of different sterilization techniques.
Another question here, compliments to a great presentation too, from one of our attendees here, and they are wondering if there's a specific chamber or setup so that they're able to use limited amounts of customized printing materials instead of commercial materials.
Yes. So yeah. Well, Sheila, you could take it.
Go ahead. No. So we've had this many times, and we have some additive experts where they will use something to kind of displace the resin, and we'll usually just machine a block really. And so then you need less of the material. And so that's useful when you're unsure and you want to buy small quantities of a new material and make sure it works before you put the time and effort into validating. So we've done that, quite frequently. And I know Jake BMF does that often.
Yes. And we actually do have, we call them the microvat setups for each of the machine. There are a variety of sizes. So depending on how much material you have, because we know if you don't want to fabricate 2 or 3 liters of material for something that's just in a testing phase, you want to be able to use 50 milliliters of material at a time and iterate on that first. So yes, we have systems developed for that, so that you can swap out those vats, and it designed for that purpose.
And then I guess kind of off of that point, 2 questions here that are more on the logistical side. I imagine here for Jake, but Sheila, this might be for you too here as well. One question is, how often would the vat need to be cleaned out? I guess we'll start there, and then I can jump to the other question after that.
Yeah, so typically cleaning out the vat is if you are swapping out materials and using the same vat, or if you have some debris in there or something like that, you can filter out that resin. And typical process is you're just pouring it through a filtration funnel and then pouring it back into the vat. Typically, that's the only time you really have to clean it out. There's really pretty low maintenance as far as that goes.
And so we've actually put a few things in place too to help keep the, resin clean and sterile. We've enclosed our printers. We have a whole system at air filtration, and typically we will gown up before we go and open any of these doors. And so we probably change resins daily, only because customers are requesting different resins all the time. So we've never had a problem of, oh, this resin's been sitting there for days. That just doesn't happen. But that's kind of how we keep it, like what Jake was saying. You can get little particulates in there. And so while this isn't, a sterile environment, we do our best to keep it from needing to be cleaned out or changed.
Kind of a second point to that is the slicer software a BMF proprietary software?
No, so we actually use third-party softwares. So the one that Parvus is using is Materialize Magics. We also use another one called Voxel Vance, which are the 2 kind of major slicing softwares that we use, but we don't have our own proprietary software for that.
Okay. Jennifer asks, are there any materials available with this technology that mimic the flexibility of thermoplastic elastomers or polyurethanes?
So I can start that one off. We don't currently have any branded materials that mimic that flexibility yet. We have some that are we would call our flexible materials, but it's more for snap fit connections, like a tougher style material. But we're always testing new materials. You can again do custom materials, so you can develop that yourself as well. And going back to kind of the other point of mold inserts, you can print the insert and then injection mold with the material that you're looking to use. So there's still ways to fabricate those parts where they are more flexible, like elastomer level short A hardness style parts without even having to print them.
Another question just coming in here too. Have you observed any challenges in print resolution due to residual stresses from UV curing? And if so, how did you overcome some of those challenges?
So I can start off a little bit on that. Typically, with most of our materials, you're not seeing too much in the residual stress from UV curing, but we also do go through a post-process, like post-cure step that you can do to finalize and eliminate some of those residual stresses. And typically, what we'll see is they're very uniform in how they may shrink. So you can compensate for that in the build, so you can still get, your CAD fidelity, high accuracy part as your final step part. There may be a slight scale factor or some adjustments that you want to make between prints, but you'll still end up with the desired part.
Yeah, so actually right behind me is one of these ovens for post-processing. And I don't know if you can really see that, but it's right over here. So there's a few different ones where once you're done with this and you clean it, depending on the resin, it will need a certain amount of post-processing.
Sheila, I was wondering too, if you could explain sort of what sort of design services you offer, if you could outline some of that too.
Yes. So we have a variety of the BMF printers, and we're here to kind of assist from part conception through full production. So we have a team of engineers, and if you have an idea, we've had people draw something up in PowerPoint and be like, hey, listen, this is what we have, and we don't know how to optimize this. So we will partner with you and, using SolidWorks or some type of CAD software, design that, and then start providing you iterations. And we go back and forth. And we've done this with several customers so far with great success.
There is one more question here that we have not gotten to, and I'm going to leave this to you because I am not the engineer, so thankfully we have the engineers with us today. The question is, I assume that supports are not desired.
So I can start that if Sheila, you want to jump in.
Yeah, no, please. I'll jump in.
At this point too. But yes, so with the vat polymerization technique, typically a lot of these materials are somewhat self-supporting because you're printing into the vat. So they're printed around the rest of the liquid resin. So you typically will need a lot less supports, if any, with this printing process. But even with our supports, since we're talking about small features, you typically don't want to lose any resolution. But that also translates to the supports themselves are very small. Typically, we're using supports that are maybe 100 micron in diameter. So even the ones that do, if you're looking at supports from a traditional macro scale or like, printing in metal, you typically want to avoid those because the post-processing steps are much, much harder to remove those supports. You'll typically result in a lower quality printed part, but in this case it really doesn't affect print quality all that much, if at all. And there's always ways that you can reorient parts to eliminate supports on certain
that's
critical
exactly what I was going to
surfaces.
say. A lot of times we'll talk to people and be like, well, if we printed it in this direction or the other, you minimize the supports you need. And they are so tiny, oftentimes when you take it off the build plate, they will just pop right off. Because again, the scale is that smaller than a human hair. So, good luck seeing that.
We have just a couple of minutes left. I have one final question, kind of a parting thought for everybody, for Sheila and for Jake. As you look at this technology and you live and breathe it every day, what do you see as kind of the biggest impact that it could have on this field into the future?
What I find really exciting and what brought me to Parvus and using these BMF printers was the ability to design parts that we couldn't before. So you have this creative freedom and you can get it to market faster. When you get it to market faster, that means it's getting to patients. So if there is a novel medical technology or some device out there that's going to help someone, we can play a role in getting that to people sooner. And, I can't think of a more exciting reason to be involved with this.
Yeah, even just going right off that too, that's pretty much exactly what I was going to say as well. Is with, with this technology, you're typically getting smaller and smaller parts. That's kind of the whole process is miniaturization. So when you're looking at creating processes and parts that couldn't be done before, typically that's now translating into less invasive procedures and new devices that are creating, like the Incomet part that would not have been feasible to make in any other way. And now there's this new skin cancer treatment that's being tested because of this technology. So that's always, very interesting for me, and something that I love doing every day is solving those challenges and allowing, that creative freedom to be able to try out these new things and push the limits of where we're going with science and technology and medicine.